1979, East Moline. Valerie was on her way home from work. She had just left the well-lit bus stop and turned into an alley. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. The young woman turned around. Someone was chasing her. The thought that they could be killers didn't even cross her mind. A street with no lights, a classic spot for an attack on women. In the darkness, it was impossible to make out the face of an assailant, but committing a crime was all too easy. Valerie had no idea that these weren't just hooligans chasing her. They were monsters, ready to kill. Her only hope of salvation was the lit windows nearby. The next moment, Valerie was knocked off her feet and thrown harshly to the ground. Luckily, she managed to take a breath and screamed, "Help!" This desperate cry was heard by a local resident. The man immediately realized that something terrible was happening. He shouted, "I'm calling the police!" The attackers loosened their grip, and then they fled. The woman was saved by sheer luck. It was thanks to the intervention of a concerned person. Unfortunately, this attack was not the last in our story, which shocked the small town. Detectives interviewed the woman who narrowly escaped and her neighbor. Every detail was important, but everything had happened in a dark alley. Valerie worked in a hospital, in the children's ward. Why had someone tried to kill her? Could it be that Valerie, a pediatrician, had made a professional mistake, and now the parents of a child were seeking revenge in such a horrific way? The detectives understood they needed to find at least some witnesses. However, it turned out to be a difficult task. The lighting, or rather, the energy-saving measures, hindered the search. In our story, the savings on street lighting played a tragic role. People returning from late work shifts hadn't seen anything. They lit their way with pocket flashlights to avoid tripping and falling into ditches. As for what was happening in the nearby bushes, they had no clue. The detectives didn't get a single lead. 2 days passed. Katie Garner was coming back from a friend's birthday party. She had had a bit of sparkling wine, and the dark alleys didn't scare her. She was just a short distance from home. Suddenly, Katie felt it. Someone was nearby. In the next second, she was struck in the head with a brick. Katie lost consciousness. She came to, feeling cold. Someone had started to take off her skirt. Desperately, she tried to cry for help. And then another flash of pain. Katie was hit with a brick again, this time in the face. The disfigured girl was found only by morning. Incredibly, she had miraculously survived. She was rushed to the hospital. Her condition was critical. The case files contained x-rays of Katie Garner's skull. She survived but was left permanently disabled. The first blow had struck the back of her head. The second was to her face. She lost one eye and was unable to breathe normally. Yes, Katie was saved back in '79, but she only lived a little over 10 years after that, eventually dying from a sudden heart attack. The police were working at full throttle. The detectives managed to find a key witness. An elderly woman who often watched from her window told them that Alex, a local man with mental disabilities who rented a nearby room, had been acting strangely recently. He had come home late, shouting something and flailing his arms. When he entered his room, he first laughed and then burst into tears. The detectives compared the dates. Sure enough, mentally challenged Alex had returned in a disturbed state right around the time of the attack on Katie Garner. The police immediately headed to Alex's residence. Alex was apprehended in his own room. He didn't resist and, strangely enough, began cooperating with the investigation willingly. "Yes, I attacked Katie. I hit her in the head with a brick and then well, you know what? I'm guilty. I won't do it again." It seemed like a full confession, but the detectives knew they had to verify and recheck this person's testimony. How could they determine if Alex was telling the truth or if his words were the product of a disturbed mind? The detectives decided to conduct an experiment. They showed Alex photos of a murdered woman from a neighboring town. The crime had happened 8 years ago and had no connection to the events in East Moline. "I killed her too. Of course I remember. It was last week." It became clear that the mentally ill man was ready to confess to any crime. For him, this was a game, a form of amusement, with everyone hanging on his every word and nodding approvingly. But unfortunately, while this was happening, another crime occurred in East Moline. Early one morning, a local resident decided to dump some construction debris after renovating his apartment. A house was being built nearby, with dirt, boards, and bags of rubble everywhere. A convenient spot to discreetly dump his own trash. Job done, he was about to head home when he noticed a decent-looking women's boot in the pile. The man pulled at the boot and turned pale with horror. He realized he was dragging a dead body by the leg. The police arrived at the scene and found the murdered girl buried under the pile of debris. She was very young. They identified her as Natalie Garrison, 16 years old, a high school student. Meanwhile, detectives carefully began questioning her parents. Natalie had been a wonderful daughter, intelligent, well-mannered, beautiful. She could have become an actress, a doctor, or an engineer, gotten married, and had children. None of that would happen. Her life ended in a pile of construction waste. What had happened to Natalie? Why did she die? The circumstances of Garrison's death shocked even the most seasoned police officers. The immediate cause of death was strangulation. The girl had been subjected to repeated acts of, well, you know, possibly even posthumously, the case file stated. She was already the third victim. Why was the police so helpless? They went over the records of previously convicted individuals again. One particular person who came to the detectives' attention was Jerry Evans. After serving time for theft, he seemed to have redeemed his past wrongdoings. But could he have returned to a life of crime? However, it turned out that the former convict had a rock-solid alibi. At the time of the murder, he was at work operating a lathe. Nonetheless, Evans remained on their radar. His unusually keen interest in the investigation raised suspicions. He kept asking, have they caught the killer yet? What are the suspect's features? What happens if someone is convicted for attacking a schoolgirl? Such a barrage of questions made the detectives wary, but they didn't arrest Evans. While working through the list of past offenders, the investigators also carefully retraced Natalie's movements on the day of her death. Where had she been that fateful evening? It turned out she had asked her mother's permission to go to a disco. So, who had Natalie danced with on the night of her death? They found out. It was a man named Vince Barton. Could he be the brutal killer? Barton was arrested right on the street. He tried to pull away. What's going on? Don't move! They brought him to the station, but Barton remained confident. I didn't attack anyone. I didn't rape anyone. I didn't kill anyone. After the disco, I went home with my friends. You can ask them. They checked, and it was another dead end. Where did Natalie go after the dance? It turned out she had decided to visit her beloved grandmother, who lived nearby. At 16, Natalie stood out for her beauty. Essentially still a child, but she already attracted the attention of men, including her grandmother's nephew. The investigation focused on this man. Who was he? Max Avery, 44 years old. He worked as a driver and had no prior convictions. Nothing seemed suspicious at first glance. It turned out that the nephew had been constantly hovering around the schoolgirl despite their age difference, not giving her any space. They forced the door open, but the room was empty. Max hadn't shown up since the day of the murder. This was very suspicious. They established the man's circle of acquaintances. His best friend Craig lived in the neighboring block. Perhaps Avery was hiding there. The detective persistently rang the doorbell at Craig's apartment. No one answered. They rang again and again. Finally, the lock clicked, and Max Avery appeared in the doorway. It was immediately noticeable that he had a fresh scratch on his face. He didn't want to talk and immediately punched the nearest police officer in the face. Avery was restrained. He seemed to be almost asking for it. Once in handcuffs, the man broke down in tears. Natalie died because of me. So what happened that fateful evening? Max Avery's version. After the disco, Natalie stopped by her grandmother's. He volunteered to walk the girl home since it was midnight. That night, Avery suddenly leaned in to kiss her. Natalie jerked her hand away and accidentally scratched the man's face with her watch. Avery felt embarrassed, released the girl from his embrace, and sadly headed home. Natalie had less than a kilometer to go, but she never made it home. The detectives were not in a hurry to believe this story. Avery was detained for questioning until all the circumstances were clarified. However, one detail in his account piqued their interest and could possibly be an important lead: the Timex watch. Small and elegant, they were inexpensive and wildly popular at the time. Those were the very watches that Natalie Garrison's father had given her for her 16th birthday. However, they were not found on the wrist of the dead girl. It appeared that the murderers had taken them. The detectives realized that if they could find the watch, they would be on the right track. 1979, East Moline. The owner of a private home on the outskirts of the city was having dinner when he suddenly heard suspicious noises. Someone was clearly in his garage. The man rushed to check it out. A young guy was already sitting on his brand new motorcycle and trying to steal it. The owner grabbed the thief by the collar and dragged him outside. Surprisingly, the hapless thief didn't even resist. Officers arrived in response to the call and apprehended the little thief. It turned out to be Jerry Evans, the very same person who had already been checked for involvement in the murder of Natalie Garrison. The suspicious character was taken to the detective's office. The attempted motorcycle theft seemed very strange. Evans clearly knew the owner was home. He had dropped everything in the garage. Naturally, the owner had rushed to the noise. A theory emerged. Evans really wanted to be arrested. Why did Evans want to go to jail so badly? Was he afraid of someone? Or was he involved in the murder of Natalie Garrison? But wait, he had a rock-solid alibi. At the time of the attack, he was working on a lathe during the night shift. His boss vouched for him. But what if that wasn't true? The boss was questioned at the workplace for the first time. Now that doubts were cast on the foreman's testimony, the man was taken to the station. They showed him the gruesome photographs of the dead Natalie Garrison. The foreman broke into a sweat and confessed. Jerry Evans had given him 2 bottles of whiskey and asked him to confirm that he had been at work if anyone asked. Now the previously convicted Evans was taken seriously. They identified and questioned all the neighbors and acquaintances. They discovered one curious fact. The first victim, the miraculously surviving Valerie, had been strangled by 2 people. Under the pressure of evidence, Jerry gave in. Yes, all the attacks were committed by me and my friend Victor Logan, but I had nothing to do with the murder of the schoolgirl. Then the detectives asked the most important question: where are the murdered girl's watches? Because with them, they could prove involvement in the crime beyond a doubt. Evans didn't sense the trap and answered candidly, Victor took them. The detectives felt a rush of excitement. It seemed that soon the murder of Natalie Garrison would be solved. The police were preparing to apprehend the second participant in the attack, Victor Logan. He was unaware that his friend Evans was already making confessions, so the detectives caught him off guard. You are under arrest. As soon as the plainclothes officers presented their badges, Logan paled but composed himself. Logan was taken to the station without any charges being filed yet. How could they file charges when the only evidence was Evans's words? What if Logan claimed that his friend was just fantasizing? The police began to push back onlookers, and then Detective Gunner decided to take a risk and disregard official instructions. She approached the workers. We are looking for a woman's watch. Your colleague Logan threw them away. Who knows about this? And there it was, a true professional breakthrough. One of the women raised her hand. On her wrist was a Timex watch. Upon learning about this crucial piece of evidence, Evans and Logan began to give confessions in a race against each other. Thus, thanks to the found watch from the wrist of the murdered schoolgirl, the guilt of the killers was fully established. Evans and Logan committed only one murder, but their victim was a schoolgirl. Moreover, they were both previously convicted. Recidivism. The judges were in doubt. Should they send these 2 away for 25 years, or was the death penalty necessary? In the end, a decision was made. Only the grave would reform these monsters. The sentence was carried out.